Members, that'll take us to our next item, which is a briefing on the Austin Tourism Public Improvement District. As soon as you're ready, take it away.
Okay. So good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Katie Zemesnik. I am an Assistant Director with the Austin Convention Center, and I'm here today to talk to you about the proposed Austin Tourism Public Improvement District, or ATPID, as you'll hear me call it throughout the presentation. I am joined by my Director, Tricia Tatro, as well as Tom Noonan, President and CEO of Visit Austin. And we're here today because on August 31st, we are asking for Council approval of the service plan and petition language that will go forward and is the first step toward the creation of the TPID. So we just want to talk a little bit about what a TPID is, Austin's experience, and then some of the financials included in there. So what is a TPID? TPIDs are a special sort of public improvement district that are created at the request of hotels. They are designed to generate funding for the district for sales and marketing activities designed to generate hotel activity within the city. Austin's specific public improvement district will actually also allow for the city to generate funding for critical city priorities through the success of the Austin Convention Center. The TPID will actually allow the Convention Center to remain competitive with our peer cities such as Dallas and San Antonio, who already have TPIDs in place. It's going to also provide critical funding for tourism in the city in the years that the Convention Center is closed for the redevelopment and expansion. And last but certainly not least, it's going to contribute to hotel occupancy tax growth, which will benefit our cultural arts, historic preservation, and live music funds. So as I mentioned, the service or the TPID is comprised solely of hotels in the city of Austin, and within that, it's only hotels that have more than 100 rooms in the city. It's over 60% of the hotels have to agree to the service plan and request this, and it includes an assessment on gross taxable room nights in the city on those eligible hotels. The Austin TPID service plan includes a 2% assessment on that gross taxable room night. The council will annually approve the budget and the updated service plan and assessment, and then it is overseen by the TPID Management Corporation, which is created as a tri-party agreement between the City of Austin, the TPID Management Corporation, and Visit Austin. This specific TPID is currently proposed to be in effect for 10 years. Council may renew or dissolve the TPID after that. As I mentioned, it must be approved by over 60% of the hotel ownership groups in the city. And then finally, the Austin TPID service plan includes a primary and secondary program of work. The primary program of work is in effect when the Convention Center is fully operational, and then the secondary program of work is in effect when the Convention Center is closed for the redevelopment and expansion project. So the service plan includes budget allocations for the revenues that are received through the TPID. What's shown on the screen here are the budget allocations that are in effect during the primary program of work. The first category, the Convention Center Group Business Incentives, which is what we'll be talking a little bit more about in later slides, is the portion that is allocated to the Convention Center for group business incentives and is the source of funding that will ultimately flow to the city as unrestricted revenue. So as you can see here, it is 20% of the total revenue of the TPID. We do have access to an additional 20% from the sales and marketing activities category below if we expend the first 20% in a given year. So I do want to pause and just explain kind of how the Convention Center's business model fits into this. So when the Convention Center is evaluating a piece of business that wants to book at the center, or if we are looking to compete to bring a convention into the city of Austin, we take a look at all of the revenue that convention will bring, not just what benefits the Convention Center. So this includes hotel tax, sales tax, et cetera. If they cross a certain threshold, we give incentives to those events or buy downs. That's essentially just revenue that the Convention Center is foregoing in recognition of the extraordinary impact of this event on the city of Austin. We are made whole through our allocation of hotel tax, and that is our business model and the business model that occurs all across the country. And so that incentive program is what is eligible under this 20%, and then the additional 20% as well. So then the next category is the sales and marketing activities. This is 60% of total revenue. However, 20%, which would reduce that down to 40, is eligible to be included in the convention center's group business category. Then you have the hotel business incentive program, which functions very similarly to the Austin Convention Center's group business incentive program. However, it's only for events that occur at area hotels. And then finally, you have 10% of the total revenue goes to research and administration. And this is just to measure the efficacy of the programs being undertaken with the TPID dollars. I do want to pause here and just acknowledge that this service plan is different than what was brought to the City Council in 2020. At that time, there was a postponement at the request of the stakeholders in order just to have a little bit more discussion as we were in the middle of COVID. We've worked really diligently with all of the stakeholders in those intervening years to bring forth this service plan. And it just really reflects the realities of the industry, the convention center, and the hotels as a whole. So in the old service plan, the convention center was envisioned to remain open during the reconstruction. That is no longer the case. And also COVID had a devastating effect on the hotel industry. And so that is why we've ended up with these categories that we have here today. So I want to talk a little bit more about the convention center incentives. So as I mentioned, the primary program of work there at the top is what is in effect when the convention center is fully operational. So that'll be the time period from now until about 2020, mid-25, when we close the facility, and then we'll be back in effect in late 28 or early 29 when we reopen. So the secondary program of work was created in order to allow the convention center to still give incentives during the closure period. But it does also recognize that that level of incentive will be far less than what it would be when the convention center is operational. So therefore, under the secondary program of work, that our 20% allocation is reduced to 10% of the total TPID revenues. And then that differential, that 10% differential is put into a floating category called the variable room night generation share. And that allows this flexibility, and it can go toward any sales and marketing activities, including further buy downs at the convention center. And so you'll see here the convention center is eligible for this category, and we would be working very hard to get that second 10%. It does also create a reopening fund. And so of the allocation that the convention center receives under the secondary program of work, 50% of any unspent or funds that have not been encumbered are earmarked into a special reopening fund that is available when the convention center reverts to the primary program of work and would be used to buy down and to do more sales and marketing activities when the convention center is reopened. So then the next question is, how does the city get the money? And so we've created this graphic that shows how it flows from how we get from TPID to unrestricted revenue into the general fund. So the first step is the hotels pay their 2% self-assessment. They remit this either quarterly or monthly, just as they do their hotel tax. And then each year, the convention center during the budget process, which again is approved by the TPID board and the city council, the convention center will review the upcoming events and submit our estimates for what incentives and what events we think would be eligible under the TPID. The management corporation reviews and approves these incentives, and then again, that budget is approved by the city council. Then the next step is that the event with the approved incentives occurs. And this is where I want to take another pause to kind of explain a little bit of the nuances with how the money is flowing to the city. So the convention center books business years in advance. And so we will be using dollars that we are allocated in a year, both for current year business and then also for future year business. The funds have to remain encumbered and restricted up until such time as the legal limitations of the funding is satisfied. In this case, it means that the event with the approved incentives actually occurs. So in what you might see in the service plan for the convention center's allocation may not necessarily reflect what the transfer is over to the city as unrestricted revenue. And this is, again, because we will be using our current year dollars both for future business and existing business. So once the event occurs, state statutes are satisfied, the funds become unrestricted. The convention center will submit all necessary paperwork to show that the event occurred and what the final incentives were. The management corporation then will transfer those approved incentives over to our creatively named ATPID fund in the city. It'll be a special revenue fund. And then from there, we will collect funds throughout the year. And then during the budget process, you'll see that transferred to the general fund and can be allocated to council priorities at that time. So the money slide. So you can see here kind of what the overall incentives, this is what's in the draft service plan. And on the pink header there is the 20% for the convention center. I do want to stress that these revenue projections are based on a 7.5% growth. This is just to ensure that the TPID is capturing the full amount of revenue available to it. It is possible that these numbers will come in slightly less than that. So you can see the 20% allocation for the convention center in that pink column. And then the light gray headers in 2024-25 all the way down to 2028-29 shows the years where the secondary program of work would be in effect. And so those numbers are halved based on the allocation. So if we are eligible and get the full 20% all throughout the full 10-year plan, you're looking at about $78 million that would flow to the city as unrestricted revenue. It could be as high as 120 if we are able to capture that additional 40% during the primary program of work. But it may be as low as 60 if the business just isn't there during those years of closure, or if we're not able to tap into that additional 40%. So as I mentioned, the TPID will be overseen by the TPID Management Corporation that is created as an agreement between the city, the TPID Management Corporation, and Visit Austin. The Austin City Council will review annually and approve the budget plan or the budget and assessment plan every year that's proposed by the TPID board. The board of directors is composed of 11 hotel members, and then there are 3 ex officio members. Visit Austin's president and CEO, the Austin Hotel Lodging and Association's president and CEO, and then the Austin Convention Center. Can you advance one slide? It's not working. Okay. Last slide, I promise. So as I mentioned at the top, on August 31st, we are asking for council approval of the draft service plan and petition language. This will allow the Hotel Lodging Association and Visit Austin to go to the hoteliers to collect their signatures. It is important to note that this step was not required by state law. However, it's been found in the creation of other TPIDs that this council approval of this gives the hoteliers certainty that nothing will change in the service plan. If the petition collection of signatures begins and the service plan changes, we have to start the process all over again. It is about a 2-month process to get the signatures for all of the hotels. And so we anticipate that we'd be back in October if council approves on August 31st. At that time, we would be doing 2 public hearings, one to create the district and one on the assessment. And then also that would be the day that council would take the action to create the district. All of these 3 things can happen on the same day. And we're anticipating that in about October and November. After that, the district will begin the assessment and the remitting of fees will occur. And then what we're recommending as staff is that during the 2025 budget process is when council would allocate the dollars. This just allows for us to see kind of how the funds are flowing, get our feet under us, and just see what we're talking about, because the funds will kind of come in during the year as events occur. And with that, we can take any questions.
Council members, questions? Yes, Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. This has been helpful. Can you talk us through the staff capacity when it comes to 20%, working on the 20% of incentives for that year? What does that look like? And if you can explain that in more detail.
Yeah, so every year we kind of know what we have. As I said, we book years in advance. And so we know sort of what our baseline level of incentives for our events are. So the process to come up with our estimate each year is pretty simple. And then on the back end, our sales team is working There's food and beverage credits that happen during the event that can change. And so we have documentation that kind of flows throughout. The other piece is we are looking at our incentive program in order to see how we can rework it to maximize the amount of funding that we can get to flow through the city. There are some pieces within there that we're taking a look at, and we think that we'll be able to increase what our current incentive program actually looks like. Won't affect our customers at all, but it will just allow us to gain a little bit of extra dollars coming out of the TPID.
You said it's easy for staff to make an assessment of how much incentive funding for that year. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that is the year, I guess the part that I'm struggling with here is you don't count it until the event actually takes place. So you would have information, is your funding this year based on events that were booked 2 to 3 years ago?
Yes, they were 5 years ago in some cases. So it's events that were booked a long time ago, as well as we do also book within a 12 to 18 month window.
So you would already have an estimate of how much in incentives you can use for the next 3 to 4 years going out. So in 2024, 25, 26, based on previous bookings.
In a normal course of business, I would say yes. Because we are anticipating closing the convention center in 2025, things are a little bit different. We're still working through what events we're able to keep on the books, and then looking at how we can evaluate a campus-wide approach. So there's a little bit more uncertainty during the years of closure, but generally speaking, when we are open and operational, and so from now until that point, I would say your statement's accurate.
And colleagues, the reason why I'm asking about staff capacity on increasing incentives, and I thank you for including in your presentation and acknowledging the change in the agreement terms that were originally presented back in 2019 to the community and proposed to council in 2020. There has been a significant difference. We went from 40% down to 20%. So I'm trying to understand, can we increase that threshold to 25%, 30%? And part of that understanding comes with what is our staff able to do. So if we wanted to go to 25% in incentives per year, what would that look like for staff?
So we have access up to the full 40% under the service plan. It just, we need to get through our first 20%. Based on our current incentive levels, I think getting to 25% would be a difficult amount, especially leading up to the closure. We've already begun to lose some business that some year-over-year business in anticipation of the closure. They needed to go and find longer-term contracts at other convention centers. So what I think that the flexibility that's built into the service plan at this point to give us the 20% and then also that additional 20% really sets us up for success, because we never want to overpromise and underdeliver.
So you say we have access to the 40%, but going more than 20% is contingent if you spend the full 20% in that year, right? And we can't get the incentive until the event is held. So there is a variable here.
So the encumbering of the funds, we'll begin selling the new convention center in 2026, and so we'll be encumbering funds, and those would count toward that 20%. So it is possible it doesn't have to be just what is actually out the door the event occurs. It can be also those encumbered funds that would count toward that 20%.
Okay. And, part of my concerns right now with the service plan and for full transparency, I'm in support of the creation of the Tourism Public Improvement District. I think we need to join other cities in having this type of fee assessed to visitors so that we can fund our tourism activity as well as other services, which for me includes addressing homelessness. What I struggle with was that there's been a significant change in the agreement from what was presented in 2019 and 2020. It took a lot of hard work to get to that agreement. A lot of conversations were involved, and we're here as a council with the consideration of putting forth a 10-year agreement, binding a council, the next council after that, to the terms that we would be approving at this time. And for me, that gives me a lot of concern since there's been such changes. We've had changes in the economy. We've had changes in the market. We're going to have a change with our convention center being fully closed. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty coming out in the next few years. So colleagues, I would love for us to consider making an amendment to the service plan and to consider it at a 4-year agreement. I think that will give us enough time to see what it would look like with us having the convention center closed. We'll have a year with the convention center open or 2, and then the closure. And then we can come back, and that council 4 years from now can take a look at the terms and make that assessment of whether or not it is in the best interest of the city. And that's also what I am looking at. The lens that I'm looking at this through is maximizing benefits to the city. So we'd love for you all to consider that as an amendment for Thursday that we were looking at. And then the other question I have is around an economic study. We know that the Tourism Commission, which is a commission of advisors that we have on board to provide their recommendations, and having the Tourism Commission's recommendation on the creation of a tourism public improvement district is important. Yet the Tourism Commission was divided. They were not able to reach consensus on whether or not to recommend this 10-year service plan to the city. And so for me, that also gives me a lot of pause, and why I think us considering this agreement at a 4-year level, as well as directing and instituting an economic study so that we can take a look at what the next few years look like, especially considering that we're going to have the convention center fully closed. So I also want us to consider that as a potential amendment that we will be bringing forward for consideration, so that we can, 4 years from now, have that study done. We can engage the city's economists as well in this conversation and be better guided. Any comments you'd like to share on the economic study?
So the lawyer's here, but I do think that state law requires a minimum of a 5-year cycle for the TPID.
Okay.
I would also say, you mentioned the uncertainty piece of it, and that's really what the hotels are looking for with that longer time frame. It allows them to get through the closure and into the reopening period, right? Because it's going to take us some time to ramp back up and stabilize as a convention center. And so if we end the TPID kind of midway through the construction of the convention center, and then that doesn't really give them that certainty, because we've been trying to get this TPID in place so that they have that funding available and that they're set up for success, so that the impact of the convention center closure to the hotels is minimized throughout the process.
Can you remind me what years the convention center will be closed?
We will be closing in spring of 25 after South by, and then reopening by January of 2029.
Okay, so there'll be years 2 through of the 10-year agreement.
So if we do, the 10-year agreement would get us to 2033, which is about when we'd hit stabilization.
So it's going to close from 25 to 29. Mm-hmm. So that would be
Roughly 2 through 6.
2. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Allison Alter.
Good morning. So we had a presentation at Audit and Finance, and one of the questions that I asked was about the South by Southwest public safety expenses and whether we could work those into the TPID, which would provide a more regular payment that we could count on.
Yep, so we are not able to directly pay for that out of the TPID dollars, right? They're restricted now after the 2019 law to sales, marketing, and business promotion directly related to hotels. We are, as we mentioned, we're looking very closely at our incentive program. The difference is we can only discount the funds that are coming from the TPID through the convention center's allocation are flowing to the general fund and not staying within the convention center's coffers. And so for us, discounting a facility is different than, perhaps us paying for the TPID dollars paying for marketing that could go, could help offset some of the police costs for South by Southwest.
So does South by Southwest pay us anything?
South by Southwest does pay the convention center a portion of a facility rental.
Okay. I still think there ought to be a way to address that expense through this process. It is very frustrating, the change in law relative to where we were in 2019. I understand the need for the TPID with respect to the health of our hoteliers during this process. But there are a lot of shifts here that make me uncomfortable. I would like to continue to see whether there's a solution here with respect to that funding, which would be over $1 million that the city is currently subsidizing South by Southwest. We all value South by Southwest and we want them there, but when we're talking about this TPID, it seems like that is really a valuable part of what we're providing to the hoteliers. So I would just throw that out to Mr. Noonan and visit Austin. If there's a creative way to do that, I think that would really add to this process.
Councilmember Codry and then Councilmember Poole.
Thank you, Mayor, and really appreciate y'all's work and talking to our staff and all the presentations that have happened. And just so I'm clear, Council Member Fuentes' proposal of a 4-year plan, that legally can't happen, but a 5-year plan would be something more attainable?
My understanding of state law is that it has to be at least 5 years.
Okay, got it. Okay, yeah, and I think if that was the case, and I don't know where the council member is at, but I think I would be in favor of a 5-year plan if that's.
If I might interrupt.
Yeah.
Part of the concern, though, is we don't get to just make that decision.
Got it.
If we want a TPID, if we believe that a TPID is in the best interest of the city of Austin, and there's reasons to believe a TPID is in the best interest of the city of Austin. It's a tool that allows not just for the benefit of the tourism industry, but the city is able to gain funds through the use of that. And of course, that's part of what we've all been talking about. We're in a very unique set of circumstances in that we're talking about creating a TPID and then closing a convention center. That's not typically the way a TPID gets created. And part of the problem is 4 and 5 years would basically create a TPID for a period of time that we're just closed. So the parties that have to actually approve this, the ones that have to actually tax themselves, if you will, so that the city can utilize this tool, my guess is, based on conversations I've had with them, we wouldn't have a TPID. So I completely understand what Councilmember Fuentes, what the goal is and what the discussion is. It's just that we're kind of in a unique, we're keeping it weird, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we need to keep that in mind.
I guess, Mayor, as a clarifying question then, is the thought here that we are supposed to rubber stamp this service
No.
plan proposal?
No,
Because if we're
no.
if we're not able to set direction in how the petition is circulated and set our priorities as a council and how we envision the TPID, which what I'm proposing is the agreed upon terms, just changing the length of time that's within the 10-year service to what is legally allowed 5. I'd be open to 6 or 7 years, whatever, open to feedback from my colleagues here. But we have to set the direction as policymakers and how we envision this public improvement district happening in our city.
There's no question that's true, and I'm not suggesting that you don't do that. All I'm suggesting is that as we make those decisions about what we want to recommend, we do take into account the reality of the situation we find ourselves in and whether we would have a TPID at all. And I just think that's part of the discussion process that we will need to have. It's not just a question of the law. It's a question of how do you get to the ability to utilize the tool. And I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, not at all. I appreciate the thoughtfulness from both Councilmember Fuentes and yourself, and I really do appreciate that. I have 3 questions for y'all, and a lot of them are more just clarifying for folks that might be watching, just to get background. So, like I said, for the benefit of anyone watching who might not know the extensive history of the TPID, can you briefly go over the pathway from initial conversations with the previous council to what we've been presented with today? So basically, how did we get here? Is my question.
And yes, and so some of this was before both of our times certainly in your role and me at the convention center. So I will do my best. So I believe the TPID conversation started back in 2017. And at that time, we were still exploring the expansion, and all of those conversations were happening. State law at that time allowed for some more permissible uses of TPID funds. And so conversations and negotiations at that time were centered around a 1% TPID where the city would get 40% of that 1%. 20% would be a direct payment to the city for use for public health and safety initiatives. And then the other 20% would come through the convention center as a buy-down incentive program. 2019, it's our understanding that some of the hotels around the state were taking a look at kind of what was going on with TPIDs and desire to have the law changed to reflect what was happening with the current TPIDs in place. And so that's where you saw that state law change. I think it was House Bill 1136. And at that time, it restricted it to just the sales and marketing and promotion of directly related to hotels within the TPID. And so from there, city staff had to pivot, and that's where you ended up with the service plan that you saw in 2020, which again was still it was 40% at 1%. And it was all for convention center buy downs. It was still bifurcated. 20% was for existing business. And then the second 20% was only for new business, which would have been a little bit more difficult for the convention center to achieve. What we've done in this service plan is now have the full 20 up to 40% is of the 2% is eligible for our new and existing business. And so the change from 1% to 2% came from the hoteliers when the convention center was envisioned to be closed rather than remaining open. And so that's where the big change was you had COVID and then the convention center expansion change. And so the hoteliers at that point desired to have a 2% TPID so they could maximize the funding that they'd be able to leverage during the years that the convention center was closed.
Great. You answered a lot of the rest of my question. And just to confirm, just for background for myself, HB 1136 was what session?
2019.
2019. Great. Okay.
Don't quote me on that bill, though.
Okay. No worries. I will not. Two more questions. And we've already kind of touched on this, and I think the council member had also touched on this. Laws changed, so the ability to receive certain benefits might not be the same. But what were the initial percentages? And if you don't have that right now, if you could maybe circle back around.
So the initial percentages, as I understand it, was the 40% of 1%.
Yeah.
Prior to 2019, that first 20% was a direct payment to the city. Post 2019, that 20% was through convention center buy downs of new and existing business. The second 20% was always just the new business portion of it. So the 2020 service plan did allow for up to 2%. It would require a 3/4 vote of the TPID Board of Directors and was not envisioned to occur until after the convention center's outstanding 2% for the 2001 expansion was paid off. So it most likely would not have occurred in the first iteration of the TPID at that time.
Got it. Thank you. You need the numbers already. And my last question, when did the iteration of this current draft plan begin?
So it would have, I jumped into it March of 2020 when I first joined the convention center. There'd already been some conversations, but then we got into it in earnest, and that resulted in the 2020 service plan that you saw, and that was postponed in November of 2020.
Great. Well, thank you for answering all my questions. And once again, I appreciate the mayor and Councilmember Fuentes on their comments.
Councilmember Allison Alter, then Councilmember Ryan Alter.
Thank you. Is there anything in the statute that limits the reimbursement to the convention center for incentives that are provided for projects to come to Austin?
I'm going to stop pretending to be a lawyer and let the real lawyers come in.
Hello, Ian Howe, Austin Law Department. So in terms of the reimbursement to the city, that depends really on the eligible uses. Are they eligible use of the TPID, and are they under the management, the service plan that the TPID has adopted? So there isn't necessarily a strict number on percentage that it can or cannot do. It just has to be an eligible expense of the TPID and under the service plan.
Okay, so if the county was providing incentives at the Expo Center, is there a mechanism where the money could flow to cover those incentives?
To the extent that they fall into the eligible uses of the TPID, and again, a county also can create TPIDs as well under the statute, they can create PIDs under the statute, but It's really about what is the expense, the advertising expense that's happening that meets the statutory definition, where that money goes there.
Okay, remind me what the eligible expenses are.
All right, I will read the exact words so that we don't have any. So this is 372.0035, and you're looking at subsection E. So it's a district created after September 1, 2019 may undertake a project under the section only for advertising, promotion, or business recruitment as authorized by section 372.003B13 directly related to hotels. And there are other, I would point out as you look at the statute, the recent legislature starting September 1, it'll look a little different because they cleaned it up as part of the omnibus bracket bill, HB 4559. So as you look at it now, it'll look a little different in a couple days.
Okay, but if we can provide incentives that are, convention exhibition hall that is less expensive, that counts as advertising for a hotel, couldn't the Expo Center be doing the same thing, say, for the rodeo? I mean, that would be a way to keep the money at least in government and be used for something we could potentially agree on
Yeah, I think
with the county.
I think I'd want to look at that question and come back to you on it. Not having.
Okay, so if you could take a look, I'm curious if there's a way to legally approach this that recognizes the consequences for our hotels of bookings at the Expo Center. County has a whole lot of other venues. We just saw like the BMX track. I don't know if they're offering things for them to come into the city through that. PARD also has a number of events, including ACL, that we are effectively helping, to be here. If there is a way to be considering those as eligible to get us to, have some confidence that we would be able to secure the 40% for investments into the community, whether it's fully under the city's control or the county's control. I mean, there are other things besides the convention center that help with hoteliers.
Oh yes, we can look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Reinalter and then Councilmember Poole. And Councilmember Poole, I apologize. I'd said I'd come to you earlier and I screwed up. So,
And if she wants to go, I'm happy to wait. Okay. Similar question. I just follow-up questions kind of sounded like Collie's question that made me think about something. As it relates to venues that attract business, if the University of Texas gives incentives to the Moody Center, in theory, that's a government entity that could engage in the same practice as the convention center. Is that correct?
I think we'd have to kind of fold that into what else is being looked at, but I would say that it would need to be a contract probably with the convention center. That's not to say it's not eligible, but I think it would, and I think that's kind of based on the controls, right? So we can't dictate what the University of Texas is going to spend their money on. We can't dictate what the county is going to spend their money on. And so there you kind of lose that level of control once you start adding that complexity. But certainly I think if there's an avenue, and we're looking at this already as part of our closure plan and the campus-wide approach that we're implementing to keep as much business as possible and as many conventions as possible during the years of closure. So we are looking at PARD facilities. We're looking at Palmer Event Center. We are looking at Moody, that kind of thing. So I think if there's a way to make it that it's a contract that flows through the convention center, I think that's probably an avenue that is certainly worth exploring and one we've kind of already been thinking about.
And you mentioned in talking about the timing, if everything goes according to current plan, the collections would start in, let's say, December. How are those collected? Are they monthly? What would the flow look like?
It depends on the hotel. So they can either remit quarterly or monthly to the TPID. Now, the portion that would flow from the TPID back to the city for the incentives for the events that actually occur, I would imagine would be on a monthly basis. We talked with the city of Dallas, and I think that's what they've what they told us that they did. And so, but again, it just is dependent on the event. So the second the event happens and we've buttoned it all up and got our paperwork in order, we'll be going to the TPID to get those improved incentives transferred over.
And if we started collecting in December, would
Thank you.
a previous buy, let's say we have a buy down for January of 24, would that automatically become eligible under the service plan, or?
Yeah, as long as the TPID is active and in place. And so that's sort of, that speaks to kind of delaying, right? So we're foregoing collections and we're also foregoing eligible events that would be, could be reimbursed through the TPID and flow to the city.
And on your suggestion that we allocate for 25, are you talking about fiscal year 25 or actually the budget process in 2025?
The budget process that will start in 24 for the FY25 budget process, yes.
Okay. Looking kind of more holistically at the purpose of the TPID. The purpose, as I understand it, as it's stated in the documents, is to attract more tourism, more hotel stays to the city. Is there any other purpose aside from that, or is that pretty much what it's for? Yeah. And you talk about being in a unique spot because we're about to close a convention center and how people would normally do it opposite. I can almost think that this is a very valuable time for the hotels to have a TPID come online, because now a big draw for them is going offline for a while. And so we potentially are authorizing new revenue to help build them back up, to help attract more tourism to offset some of that convention center. So it almost seems to be an appropriate timing, but then in how the plan is structured, it does feel very, it's bifurcated, right? You've got your first half, which is when we're closed, and the second half when we're not. And I think that just speaks a little bit to what Councilmember Fuentes is talking about in terms of temporally looking. We do have a very natural break in this. In terms of the reopening fund during the closure period, mm-hmm. Is that money allocated in the fiscal year of being less than 10%, or is it allocated, is there going to be some separate bank account where in 2026, if we spend 8%, 50%, 2%, so 1% will go over to the reopening fund, that'll just sit in the bank account? Or is that just on the, how does that work in terms of actual dollars?
That's exactly how it will work, is that it will be eligible to be spent once we reopen the convention center. And again, we will be encumbering funds as well, and so those dollars don't count. So we might actually spend 8% and then we encumber the additional 2%. And so then no money would go to the reopening fund because we've spent our allocation.
Okay, so the encumbered counts towards the year is encumbered, not the year spent. If, and this might be an Ian question, if it was less than 10 years and we encumbered funds outside of the plan period, let's say it went 5 years to 2029 and then we have contracts to 30, 31, what happens to both the reopening fund and the TPID wouldn't exist, but those funds have been encumbered? Are they sitting in a bank account, or are they?
Yeah, so
just a functional question of what that would look like.
And yes, that is one of our concerns with a shorter time frame as well, is ending the TPID right in the middle of the closure when we've built up all of these funds that are going to be spent when we reopen. And what happens? My understanding is that the funds either go back to the hotels. Or it sounds like they can also be spent down, but Ian might be able to answer that question. But that is one of our concerns with that as well. Our incentive program is going to continue regardless. The TPID is not affecting our ability to do our business as usual. It might help augment it a little bit, but that is a concern with, building up this fund and then ending the TPID potentially, and then what happens to those dollars they can't just flow to the city as general fund.
Okay. Well, like Councilmember Fuentes, I support the TPID. I think it's an important tool, especially as we enter this closure period. It will help us continue to have the business here in Austin, the tourism, which supports many of our local businesses. And so it, in some fashion, is coming right at the right time. I, like the council member, want the best deal possible for our residents, and I think you have really worked within the sandbox you find yourself, and it's a tough balance. I don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face, but I also want to do everything we can at this moment, because this moment, once it passes, there's no going back. So I really appreciate your words and help thinking about this.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Poole?
It feels like a long journey
Yes.
here with the convention center. Mayor, I just wanted to make sure that the city manager and the staff and the leadership overseeing all of this know how much I appreciate the really strong work that has been brought to bear over the last 2 to 3 years to get us to this particular point. Getting here has been a heck of a journey. And to have a sense of what the future of the convention center looks like, and to have it crystallizing as we do here now with this vote in front of us, I think is a really important moment for the community. I've scrutinized this deal in its many permutations pretty closely over the years, and have argued with staff about details on it. And I think that what we have in front of us here is a good outcome, Mayor. And I would argue for the longer term for a number of reasons. One is it gives us some runway that I think we will need, because we don't know how long this will actually take. We've got estimates and we've got aspirations, but we won't know. And I think that actually works to argue for the 10-year term. I wouldn't want to shortchange that and then realize that we need to continue it and have to go back to square one and ask for everybody to sign up again. I wouldn't want to do that to all the hoteliers and the city staff to go through the process a second time. So I support the longer term that has been recommended here by the staff. I also want to point out the role that the Tourism Commission has played in the past, and there was a divided opinion about what the fate of the convention center should be, and I think that we still see some echoes of that dispute that was at the Tourism Commission. But this dais did make the decision a couple of years ago on how we were going to move forward, and staff has since that point been building on that clear vote and approval of the dais and that the item that we're looking at here with the TPID grows directly from that ground. So I will be supporting this item on Thursday, and wanted to take this moment to thank the staff for the extraordinary effort that has in fact reshaped the vision and discussed it with us and described it to us in ways that are comprehensible, taking into account the changes at the legislature, things that we knew were coming our way and things that we didn't know, but still rolling with those punches. And I thank you all for that work. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. If there are any questions, I've got a couple that I would like to get a couple of things on the record, because I know people are talking about things out in the universe there. First, I'd like for you to describe how the decisions get made on the reimbursement, and who makes the decision to offer a so-called incentive or a buy down.
Sure. Tricia Tatro, Director of the Convention Center. So Visit Austin is our main marketing arm and does a majority of the work going out to get the business, the tourism business to bring into Austin. So when the leads come through Visit Austin, we meet together, we identify what the type of business is, how big the group is, and we analyze that, as Katie said earlier. We analyze the total room nights that they'll be bringing in, what the economic impact is to the hotel community, what the sales tax impact is to the overall city, and then lastly, what would the convention center revenue be? We look at the convention center revenue kind of last because, again, our business model is structured in such a way that we are here to maximize hotel occupancy tax, and so we will receive that on the back end of things. Once we take a look at the total value of that piece of business that we're looking to bring into the city, then we collectively work together with Visit Austin and the hotel community as we're looking at what blocks of hotel rooms are available in the city for this total package, and then we come to an agreement on what the overall rates of the hotels will be, the groups, the amount of space that can be booked at each hotel, and what that convention center discount is going to look like. So the convention center will then put together a contract, and that contract will show what the overall facility rental is for the actual convention center and any of those ancillary services that the convention center offers, food and beverage, things of that nature. From there, we take that and we analyze and we give discounts based on what those booking and room night credits are, what some of the food and beverage is that's going to be spent, and then we come up with what an actual facility rental cost is. The difference between what we would have charged and what that with those discounts are is the amount of money that would be eligible to be submitted to the TPID. So we will work in partnership with Visit Austin as we're evaluating pieces of business to identify whether or not that piece of business will meet the thresholds of bringing actual room nights to the city, whether that's existing business or new business that we're looking for. And then those discounts will flow through from the convention center's contract.
But that's the ultimate decision, when you keep saying we, the ultimate decision, the business decision that gets made about what's the incentive going to be, factoring on all those different things that you brought in, that's ultimately a decision to be made by the convention center?
That is correct.
And so while it may be made in concert with Visit Austin,
Correct.
it's not Visit Austin that's making that decision.
Correct.
And if Visit Austin were to go out and market and work to get a piece of business and even say incentives will be available, may be available, however they sell that, ultimately that decision has to come down to a business decision made by the convention center as a professional determination.
If you're talking about the 20% of the convention center's allocation, or between that 20 and 40% of the convention center's allocation, that is correct.
What I'm worried about is situations where those who might be looking to create a TPID are worried about who makes the ultimate decision about where the money, where the incentives will get spent, how much will get spent, those sorts of things. That comes down to the convention center's professional staff, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Where are we? Is it an RFP or an RFQ on the convention center right now?
It's actually both. We
Good.
have
Good. I feel better about my question now.
we actually have, I think, 4 solicitations. 2 have closed. We've done evaluations. So we had an RFQ for design and engineering services. That is closed, and evaluations have been done. RFP for construction management services. Those are the 2 that form that construction manager at risk methodology. That is also closed. Evaluations are underway. And then we will be back to council in the fall for approval of those 2 contracts.
So what would happen if a decision were made that we wanted to reopen that? What would it do time-wise and otherwise to the process? I'm not suggesting it. I'm just, there's a lot of talk out in the world.
It's like you probably saw the expression on our
I
faces.
did, yeah. I worried a little bit about causing a health problem, so I wanted to
It's like
clarify
think of having
that.
a heart attack. So certainly from a timing perspective, we would absolutely lose another year on this project. And the loss of the first year during the negotiations with the Hilton cost us just south of $200 million to the project, just because of inflation. Because we are constrained by the South by component of all of this, it is critically important that we minimize the effect of South by, or the effect of the closure on South by. It is our largest event, one of our largest economic generators, and so our construction timeline is we have to close after a South by and open after a South by. So this move would absolutely, if we were to reopen it, would absolutely, from that perspective, make us lose yet another year. I don't know what the legal recourse is of those who have already submitted. I would have to look at our contracting folks and get that answer.
I
But
just talk about time.
it would be very, very detrimental to the project.
If I could add to that, in that year, we don't have any business, so we have been releasing conventions in anticipation of this process.
Thank you for that. When did the RFQ, when did that close out? And if you don't know, you can get that to me later, but I just go, part of the reason I'm asking this is because I want people in the world to hear these things.
Yep, it closed end of July. I
Okay.
think both of them closed end of July.
Both of them, you believe at the end of July?
Yep.
Good, all right, thank you. Members, you got, yes, Councilmember Poole.
One last thing, it occurs to me that it might be helpful for us to get a refresh on the economic impact of South by and the revenues that flow from that, and to give some frame for why there are certain fees that may be waived by the city. So we've got some historical perspective on that take us up to the current day. Mayor, do you think that'd be something we
Yes.
could maybe get a briefing on?
Absolutely.
That'd be
Okay.
helpful.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you all very much. And council, that's a good discussion on both of those items, so thank you for that.